Embedded World, the fair we all love or love to hate, depending on if we get the t-shirt or not. In this little video, I'm going to give you an overview of the key points of Embedded World. If you want a more detailed nitty-gritty and you speak English, look at my Instagram account shown here. And if you speak German, look at Utznet. Either way, we are going to look at the things on a photo by photo level with some textual conversational explanation. And I hope that this is going to be somewhat useful for you. The first topic, and the most interesting topic for me, is microcontrollers. And what I found really interesting was that the role of the fair, as the fair itself as the venue for showing the new technologies, has greatly diminished. A lot of the exhibitors, for example SGS Thompson, they simply sent a press release before the fair. Whereas some other companies, such as Microchip and Renesas, just sent out press releases and newsletters and didn't even bother to bring the products to the fair. And of course, there is always the problem of Embedded World this year being in an electronica year. So a lot of the big news with many of the chip manufacturers have already been fired away before. First things first, Texas Instruments decided to play the famous game of We Shrunk the Microcontroller. And this super tiny little thing, incidentally, has an ARM Cortex M0 Plus core. So you can run quite advanced algorithms in it. Next up, and about this we will make a second video, was Infineon and their new PSoC4 Multisense. And this is a technology where my clients have just been going crazy about it. Because what you see here is a liquidity sensor. But the magic thing about it is not a normal liquid sensor, but you glue it to the outside of the container. So there is no risk of contamination or electrolytic corrosion. And incidentally, the advanced algorithms inside of the microcontroller allow for some advanced tasks such as foam rejection. So you can detect if a liquid is foaming. Next up was NXP. They were by and large busy showing off their embedded AI system, which they had just bought. But then they also showed this thing, which is an automotive microcontroller intended for multi-segmented payloads. Next up, Witsnet. We all know them for their Ethernet accelerator. There is now a new version of the controller which has a Cortex M3 core instead of the RP2040 which they used before. Nuvoton, they firstly demonstrated one of their new microcontrollers with phase segmentation. And then they introduced something very interesting, which I like a lot because it shows just how specialized microcontrollers are today. And this thing, what you see here, is a microcontroller intended purely for the needs of USB-C periphery, and particular power periphery. Next up, we've got our favorite Scandinavians and their low power startup. I know they've been promising this forever, but they claimed that now really big smørrebrød rom-pom-pom promise that they will ship an EVB in the next few weeks. Synaptics, they now rolled out their MPU and now they told more about the small AI MCU. And what I found really interesting was how they basically have 3 tiers of power consumption inside of the chip. And the idea is that the software can select how much of the chip it wants to switch on and how much it wants to keep switched off in order to trade off the power consumption. And yes, there will eventually be an SDK for the thing, and this you see in this picture here, how the structure of the SDK will look when it's finished. The next big topic is test equipment. Here also the same rule applies. Test equipment in an electronica year is a hairy topic because there is a lot which has been shown at electronica, and the word on the street is that many exhibitors consider the people who visit electronica to be wealthier than the people who visit EmbeddedWorld, and so the hot things are usually shown at electronicas. One really new product came to us courtesy of Rode and Schwarz, who finally updated their vector network analyzer and plan to update it even more up to 54 GHz. And the key feature, of course, in addition to all the improved analog baseband blah blah blah, is that the machine is now able to sweep much faster, which, for example, in ATE applications, saves a lot of time. And incidentally, in the background, we see that the test equipment vendors are now switching over to Windows 11. And as we see here also something very neat, the system drive is removable, and this is probably a hat tip to Rode and Schwarz's long history in the defense space, where often test equipment has to be scrapped because there is no legally acceptable way to shred the data saved in it. Be that as it may, next up are the fine folks from Red Pitaya. They finally released the second version of the Red Pitaya. Feature upgrades, now it has USB-C. And the one thing which I personally find interesting are the advanced interfacing options. First of all, the thing is now able to boot from eMMC, which lets you use it as some kind of standalone test equipment. And secondarily, there is an LVDS port which lets you connect external hardware directly to the FPGA. Next up, our friends from Magnovia, the West Germans who built an oscilloscope. And what you see here is the carrying case, which is new. And then also what we see here is a foot switch for launching the trigger. And I know that now everybody expects a joke with a good-looking 45-year-old girl, but this is actually a smart idea, because that way you can quickly trigger the scope without having to touch it. As for LaCroix, they didn't show much. A PCIe 7 testing system, that's all that they had new for this fair. More surprisingly was Rigol. Rigol put in front of their booth a table with a few devices which they explicitly declared to be prototypes, namely, firstly the spectral analyzer, and secondarily the vector network analyzer. And here you see more close the front of the one and of the other. And what I find interesting is the frequency in the range of 26.5 GHz, because there has been a recently released analog devices front-end chip for that. Then on to Unitrend, where software is just eating the world. They added some new features to their signal analyzer, and they will add even more features soon. And finally, we've got a hat tip to Iwatsu, the oscilloscope of my youth. You see, they are now no longer only working for LaCroix, they are again independent. I mean, this scope is not particularly new, but whenever I see it, I just like to show it for a few seconds. One more interesting thing about the test equipment is that in many ways we are seeing the return of the logic analyzer. What we see here is an Indian company, and they produce protocol analyzers, which are basically dedicated to analyzing what is happening on a protocol level. And what is very interesting about them also is that they don't only do their own hardware, but for some products, as you see here, they also enslave oscilloscopes. And then, as always, the FPGA people, they are also here. Here I've seen an interesting trend. Last year it was all about fixed function blocks and larger, whereas this time they are scaling down. And generally the word on the street seems to be, we want to make pure breed FPGAs, and I'm gonna show you a little bit what this means. Next up, I will have to be a little bit troublesome, but I have to give this to Altera. Their new Agilex 3 is a very smart idea, and as you can see here on this little development board, which they sadly didn't give me, many of the Agilex 3 are pin compatible with their Agilex 5 brothers in crime. And essentially, the whole idea behind the Agilex 3 is to eliminate many of the fixed function units found on the Agilex 5 predecessor, and so to create it is difficult to translate, a clean-breeded FPGA. The idea being that a fixed function unit always draws a bit of current, and if you have an application which just needs a purebred FPGA and you eliminate all the unneeded silicon from the chip, of course you can make do with significantly less power. And this is basically what Altera is trying to do here. In the terms of my beloved AMD, what should I say? AMD also introduced something, and they introduced a new FPGA where the goal also mainly is more and more I/O. And as we see here, they really plan to bring out evaluation board soon. So if any one of you likes to use AMD or Xilinx, this might be a product which could be really helpful. And then finally, we also have to look at the third guy in the crew, being Govin. And Govin, they fired off most of their news already at Electronica, and so they focused on applications. And they showed two really neat things. First of all, here in cooperation with CPEAT, a PCIe card. And the idea is here that you just ram it into a workstation and Bob's your uncle, because then you're basically able to do your FPGA interaction much more efficiently. And secondarily, they showed an advanced Game Boy emulator, Game Boy remake combination, which can run both original Nintendo and successor modules. And here, of course, most of the processing is handled by Govin FPGA technology. Next, wireless modules. Let me just tell you, there is not particularly much new, but there are some interesting new aspects. Espressif, they decided to integrate their own radio stacks more tightly into the HALs of the Arduino group, as you see here and as you also see here. And then they also decided to go back to their roots of being a wireless provider with their new out-of-the-box Matter connectivity products. First traditional wireless module maker is Kavli. They introduced two new smart modules which can run Android or Linux on the wireless module, and their main selling point, I believe, still remains the OpenSDK, which is a software development kit which lets you run FreeRTOS directly on the wireless module. Next up, we've got u-blox. u-blox also fired away most of their information at the Electronica. What is new is what you see here, a GPS module with an antenna integrated right on the module. Quectel, of course, they went crazy. They showed off a new smart module optimized for AI tasks and a few other generic modules. With Telit, the situation was more simple. Few new 5G modules, nothing particularly interesting. And one thing which I did find interesting was this company. I know them for a long time, and they basically developed their own mesh networking technology or topology. And they are now transitioning their proprietary technology into an open source system. And to support this also, you see here they have this little campaign which makes the dev board much cheaper. Next up, from Semtech, the company behind LoRa, we see they have a new wireless chip which supports all forms of LoRa. Also the new LoRa high speed for AI data transmission. And what is interesting, it also can integrate itself into various third-party wireless stacks. So the idea is that you put this onto your embedded device and then basically all of your wireless needs are solved. And finally, we need to mention Shelly. You know them for their smart home stuff. And now you see here, they have a module. And the idea is that you put the Shelly module into your system and then you get full access to the whole Shelly ecosystem and wireless communication and everything, and you don't need to worry about it. Another interesting field is industrial networking and computing. And here there are some major news, especially from the SPE society, single pair Ethernet people. When your spouse is very hissy, eventually it ends up single. And the connector manufacturers in the SPE single pair Ethernet space, they have been very, very hissy recently, or at least until like half a year ago, and that just prevented growth of the technology. And what you see here is a connector face or a connector snout. And this snout has been standardized to be integrated into the various other connector portfolios like M12 and everything. And the stopping of the has immediately gained industry attention. You see here that the standardization organization is getting new members all the time, and also the user organizations are praising. So SPA really is a technology which is on the up. CAN-FD is also interesting because CAN-FD in principle is an old technology, but now they introduce a new thing called CAN-FD Lite, where the idea is purely to reduce the costs for an implementer. And they do this by breaking the protocol into two gangs. Firstly, there is the commander, which needs a full CAN controller, and this can send out commands to receivers. And due to a simplified protocol, the receiver device only needs a CAN transceiver, which is cheaper. And then finally, the Profinet organization decided that why not do a little more? And they also introduced what you see here. And this is basically some kind of hardware abstraction layer for all kinds of tracker technology and tracker system. And then, of course, there is always some random stuff. And here is the video about the random stuff. First and most important thing is the OEM Secrets booth. If you are at any conference, you must visit this price comparison engine because they will give you unlimited free beer. Next up is my old friend Mr. Rieger from Asus IoT, who has been very proud to demo this new little computer, which is based on an NVIDIA Jetson. So it's basically intended for all kinds of AI acceleration. And finally, at the back, it has an RS-232-like port, which exposes all the GPIOs on the SoC. Next up, we've got JLC PCB, who have a new 3D printing technology, which is able to produce fully colorized objects, as you see here in these two demonstration snaps. Then another people who deserve praise is MathWorks. They understand why people visit changelogs, and they have this smart interactive changelog where you can basically say you want a difference between A and B, and then they give it to you. And finally, I met one of my mentors, Professor Helmut Keller, and I just wanted to say mad respect to you. It was a great honor to see you there, my friend. Thank you for everything. And the last question, how much does it cost to go there? This, of course, is a highly subjective one, but EmbeddedWorld is large enough to make hotels go crazy price-wise. And I'm now going to show you quickly the costs which I had traveling from the Budapest office where I'm filming right now. Of course, if your bunker is in Nuremberg, your cost structure will look different, but this is by and large how the things will look. So, first things first, of course, the train ticket. Basically, train travel inside of Austria or West Germany almost always is cheaper if you book it from the Hungarian railway service, and you just add an unneeded sector to Budapest. You just need to make sure that the train you bought in Vienna would be the one you would be on from Budapest. And then, as for the Airbnb, I was a little bit late to book it, but I found myself this thing here. It was a pretty decent place. And then, of course, usual Western German costs apply. This time, the ticket permitted you for free travel on public transportation on the exhibition days. So you maybe had 10 euros of extra public transport tickets. And then, of course, whatever you eat. Food at the conference is expensive, but there is a solution for that. You can bring your protein bars, and beer is unlimited at our friends at OEM Secrets. And with that, I'm very thankful for your attention. Please let me know down there in the comments whether you like this format, whether this format brings value to you, and whether I should do more of these kind of slideshow presentation videos.